Thank you very much, Christopher. And I would like Gitte and Niklas to join Christopher. That is also welcome to rejoin the stage or the front of the room. We have some time for questions. I'll ask the first question so that you can think about what your first question is going to be just in a little bit. And so I'm super curious to hear about what sort of signals that you see now that will potentially create new formats for creative expression, or also what combinations of existing formats and technologies that could create a third one. Because as you realized, thinking about new media, that was not sort of the peak of that area, and imagination is probably not going away anytime soon. So what do you guys see looking forward?
I think I was just gonna comment on something you said about the dark side of the crypto blockchain, because I agree. And a few years ago, I was very active in the crypto culture on this social media, Clubhouse, and these places. And for the first months I was there was so much openness. People from all over the world were participating, from all ages. But very fast, over the spring of 2001, when the auction houses began selling crypto art, there was a shift where suddenly again it was white dudes from Silicon Valley that was sitting in these rooms and defining. And at first I was so happy to see so many different perspectives on the blockchain and on crypto art, and I didn't even notice how I fell into a sort of fan base of these dudes, because it happened so naturally, and I just realized that I was taking advice from 25-year-old game designers, and I because they had such an aura and really friendly approach to sharing their practices and their methods. So they were so alluring in a way, and I didn't see myself shift from being a contemporary artist with my own capacity into suddenly taking advice and from people that I would normally not respect. But it happened so fast, and I think humans are also humans when they are in these social media structures, and very fast we begin copying human nature from the real world into these. I just felt that myself, that I turned to these young men that began defining. That was just when you talked about decolonization, and I think that the ideas are set for that, but in reality, humans are humans, and we fall into these patterns really fast.
Is that a bad thing?
For me, it was. I really had to leave that whole culture and just focus on my studio work and not really be part of the debates there any longer.
Yeah.
But I mean, for the dude, it wasn't a problem. I mean, many of them have a lot of success today, commercially.
Yeah, I don't know if we should continue on this thread, but I mean, I think it's very typical of these kind of new disruptive technologies that they are, of course, we often oversee that they are designed or envisioned from a very specific cultural point of view. So we know the critique of solutionism is that it's all these white kind of bachelor dudes in Silicon Valley that design solutions for problems that are theirs and maybe not the rest of the world. And in some places they then cause kind of more harm than actually improvement. So there's a similar discussion maybe that to that overall critique that you're raising, I think. But that doesn't mean that that's not always the precondition for how we work with these technologies in a way. So how can we kind of work with that in a more perhaps progressive way, but realizing that there is no universal kind of decolonizing way.
No.
Really.
And of course, Web3 will be the infrastructure very soon and in the future. But I think it's important that artists and thinkers that come from a different perspective also add to the conversation in this build up, and not just let that whole train just go. Yeah.
I think what I'm going to add here is not. I mean, we clearly have experts in the crypto Web3, so I'm going to leave that space. But in the realm of decolonization, I think we are getting more and more aware of how few and very dominant images of the future we generally have available to us. And I'm afraid that it stems from the future's practice being out of a very white and Western and male-dominated way of thinking about the future. It's very economically driven. It's very linear way of approach to time. And I'm great to see, and I'm curious to explore the other practices of using the future that exist around the world. And there is a whole search of futures practitioners from the global south challenging the way that the Western paradigm has approached the future. So a signal is that we are diversifying ways of imagining the future, and I'm here for it.
You want to add any signals, Christopher and Dita?
I forgot your question.
Yeah.
That's fine. We got one great answer at least. I mean, what can you expect? It's Friday morning,
Yeah.
so we have one question from the audience already, and please say your name and what you do when you're not here.
Yeah, my name is Kristen. I have a background as a journalist and a digital marketer. And right now I'm into farming, crafts for self-sustainability and transitioning. So my question, I love technology and I love everything digital, but my question would be, because we have the prospect of an energy crisis, if you were to remove or drastically cut back on electricity for future mediums for creative expression, then what are your thoughts on those futures?
May I?
Yeah.
My answer is influenced by the time I spend with students, and when I try to help them anticipate the future that they would desire. They would really, really like to disregard the digital communication that has taken over the educational system, and they miss being physically together. And I am also pretty drained from, what do we call it, Zoom fatigue these days. So the simple short answer would be to prioritize physical meetings.
So let me take the opposite opinion.
Yes, please do so. Friction, yeah?
Yeah. So, and as often with what I say, it's not necessarily my opinion, but let me just take that opinion. So, if now that we have an economy that is in free fall, I think maybe cryptocurrencies and the build out of the blockchain, that it's okay that it costs a lot of energy, because if you need something digital, it's so difficult to grasp, really understand what it is. Digital money, you need some sort of real energy from the sun or whatever to put into this invention of new money. For us to understand that it has value, it needs energy to be put into it. So what if we take Bitcoin, for example, and have that as our new global economy, and then just take away all of the energy that we use on bureaucracy in banks and all of the things that go really slowly. So I'm just saying that everything cannot be cheap or free, if it has to have value that we as humans understand as real value.
Well, May I also add?
Sure.
Or
Yeah. Go ahead.
did you want to comment on the answer? No.
Well, it still needs energy. It still needs. I mean, if the technology for enhancing energy from the sun is not developed in a way that will give sustainable,
That oil or whatever. Yeah.
yeah. But if it's removed,
Yeah.
or drastically cut back,
Yeah.
then what would that be in your scenario?
Economy in free fall. And yeah.
Well, I guess nuclear power is on the rebound here now,
Mm.
and we see a lot of actually people in crypto arguing also so explicitly for nuclear power. I would suggest, I mean, take an example right now from Denmark, where there has been quite a huge scandal of schools, elementary schools, using Chromebooks. So the state decided to, or different cities decided to give out free Chromebooks to all students from like first grade and so on, which has now been deemed by the Datatilsynet, how you say that, I don't know in English, but in Denmark, as completely against data protection law. And so they have kind of called certain cities, like in Helsingør, to stop using them. And then you have these kind of pictures of teachers in the news going down into the basements, finding again pen and paper and saying, I haven't been down here in like so many years. I don't know how to use these. And why is the government against progression? You know, like, and I think this is for me a picture of how wrong it can go when we think about these technologies as kind of linear, always better. And if you're against them, you critique them, you're against kind of technology at large. While this example actually gives us a reason to think more thoroughly about also indirectly energy use, and also future literacy was mentioned, and part of that future literacy should definitely also be a media literacy that includes a vision on the sustainability of technologies. You have a PhD researcher here in Malmö called Roskam Abing, who is an expert in so-called federated networks, and also is running solar-powered websites, and this whole kind of idea of sharing the resources of, coming back to the network topic, of, for example, network computing, running our social media platforms and so on. I know on a large scale it's probably utopian that everybody would switch to this, but I think a lot of the kind of administration of our banks, state, and so forth could actually, run more energy efficient if one were to not rely only on this very distant cloud solutions. Yeah. So that would be it.
Do we have any more questions? And you can also decide if you want to ask a question to all three or just one. In the back, who are you and where are you coming in from?
Who are you?
We're like here at the Integra. I thought basically creative mediums in the future. There's been movements such as steampunk, cyberpunk, which is all very dystopic, and now this, I guess one movement has been solar punk, which is more about the radical, optimistic future, talking about solar energy. How do you see any signals or anything in those spaces where you see more movements into the more utopic visions of the future versus the more dystopic?
So I'll say the question again. So do you see movement towards utopian versions of the future or dystopian futures?
In regard to environmental...
I think any futures would hold problems, wicked problems such as climate change, inequalities, or whatever else that exists in the system will build. But it's more, how do you see in the work you're doing that things are being pointed towards more, should I say, the solar punk movement such, or is it still much in the cyberpunk, which is much more dystopian?
I'm afraid that we're still moving in the very dystopian space, and the arts and culture institutions that I work with are actually currently trying to activate more utopian thinking. In the sense that there's a piece of work out of a Finnish think tank called Demos that lays out the idea of the imaginary crisis. That also tells us how and why dystopias are in demand. It perhaps tells us a little bit about why, because the present moment is very difficult. So when we are fed with dystopias that are worse, we can comfort ourselves. So it's also a question of supply and demand. I think it is time, and I think we have a collective responsibility to point towards alternatives, utopias, and other ways of being. But I do not necessarily, I'm afraid, see it as a strong signal as of yet.
There's also a line of thought called protopianism, where
True.
where it's not utopia, it's not dystopia, but it's a way where you take one day at a time. Sometimes you develop, things go a little better, then it's 2 steps back, and then you go a little step forward. But that thinking of being in the now and just trying to move the little bubble that you are around forward. And it's very difficult because we have so much sci-fi. It's very difficult for us to think 100 years into the future. We would rather think like where we're going to be for Christmas or our next holiday a year from now that goes to Thailand. We don't think 100 years out into the future because it gets too sticky. And I think, it's interesting what you are doing to try to look further, but it's just in our minds very difficult to spend time doing, because
Absolutely. Collectively, there is we struggle with short-termism, day-to-day business, rent, what we're going to eat, what we're going to do, the gutter. And I comment on utopia and dystopia. I think it's very important that that's very nuanced. Utopias for you is not necessarily utopias for me, and the same with dystopia. So it's very important that we remember our own position and the author's position when we go down those two routes.
Do you want to say something as well? And I go back and catch the next question.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against having kind of ideals, but I think that, we should go beyond the utopia dystopia moment when we have these kind of discussions, or that duality. I mean, today, solar punk, cyberpunk, all other kind of future punks. If you go on Netflix, you will find myriads of these kind of series with these aesthetics and narratives. And so I think that has been completely, on one hand, mainstreamed, but on the other hand, you have a kind of a cognitive dissonance, because all the media that we use, and also the vision of something like metaverse, is a utopian vision, of course, and it has this kind of frictionless ideals behind it. So I think rather we need to actually be able to, as you were talking about, embrace uncertainty and friction when we talk about not only this future, but the fact that there is no tensionless utopia. So I would rather work with that than paint up that polarity. Yeah.
We have time for one more question, and it's from the gentleman in the back. What's your name and what do you do when you're not here?
Being a gentleman, of course. Thank you. I'm Thomas. I work with AI in mental health care. And building on the previous question, I'm thinking that the narrative around the future is often depressive and negative. And I can see how that affects our approach to new technology, which we often nowadays question, especially AI that I'm active in. Is this a necessity that we need to have a critical look at new technology, or could we actually benefit from having a more positive view and embracing technology? I can see how you all embrace it. So a bit challenging maybe in this room, but I would say that the vast majority of people around us have a negative approach to new technology. Can we change that, and should we?
I think already now our kids are embracing it. On the list of wishes for my 7-year-old kid's birthday, there were boxes of Lego and then diamond swords. And when I asked him, then the diamond swords were digital assets in computer games, and some gold helmet and whatnot. But he doesn't even distinguish between the two. He is so immersed into understanding that digital assets is the same as a physical thing. So I think now we are all older than 7 years old, but I think the next generation just have a more natural, positive use then of different technologies. But they are also, of course, guided by people of our age that are building these things for them now. That was not really an answer, but sort of a...
It's also a fairly opinionated answer that you're seeking, I think. And if I may, I think it's very healthy if we remain critical of technological and digital infrastructure that we are rolling out, because I think we find ourselves in a situation where we recently just woke up and we were like, oh, something's called big tech and it has us in right here in its hand, right? So I think it's very healthy to remain critical of new technology, not necessarily dismiss it because we need it and it is a part of evolution. I'd go so far to say that, but yeah, it's not for anything.
I mean, I think we should move beyond really the question of technology. Again, I have to stress this, being good or bad, because technology is part of our society, and our future will contain traumas that are already lived and felt. And younger generations, I think, need to, and already do, I think, in their practice, how they use technology. They don't necessarily make that distinction. And I think by reiterating that, is technology good or bad? Can we have a better view of it or not? We're working against this transversal thinking that I was trying to propagate, where it is part of our mental sphere even, and environments, and they are never unambiguous. So, yeah.
Kristoffer Gansing, Ditte Ileskov, Niklas Larsson, give them a warm hand. And I think you should give yourself an applause as well. So thank you for being a great audience. But don't leave just yet. We know that this stirs up a lot of thinking in all of us. And so we've prepared 2 rooms. So for those of you that want to stay a little longer, the super room and the chambre séparée next door is open. There's some coffee and croissant if you want to stay around. We've gathered some books in a sort of a pop-up library. You'll find a fantastic book showcasing Ditte's last exhibition. There's also a scenario report made by that Niklas was heavily involved in. Unfortunately, we don't have Christopher's PhD in the library just yet. But
I can leave an exhibition guide.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And also, on the way out, there is an example of experimental future. During the spring and summer, we've, together with an artist called Mariella Ottosson, created a futures prototype. So that's the chunky thing that you probably saw when you entered Media Evolution this morning. Please indulge in that. It talks about work some generations from now, since this has been a place of work for generations, and maybe in a future that is disrupted by climate crisis. And also a future when we talk to algae. It's super exciting. I strongly recommend it. There's that. And I would also just say, see you again. We have lots of interesting things coming up. Keep an eye out for in our newsletters and so on. And we're looking forward to have you back. And as promised, I will also show you QR code again. So play around with that, talk to each other, and have a really good rest of your day and weekend as well. Thank you so much.